We're running a little bit late. I suggest that we start. And morning, everyone. It's kind of a challenge to deal with all of the logistical hurdles during such a big gathering. And we are quite privileged that we have most of our speakers here in time. And we will have one more joining us. And good morning, everyone in Ukraine's pavilion. And the second week of COP30. And it's a great privilege of me to welcome you on the session that is called Security from the Ground Up, Soils and the Foundation of Resilience. My name is Євгенія Копиця, and today I would try to walk you through the security consideration, the challenges that the countries in war and beyond are experiencing when we're talking about the land restoration and on. And I would like us to start with a few words to set the context that today's crisis, which is being experienced by the countries all over the world, it's considered and connected with the food shortages, climate instability, water stress and conflict. They all share the same denominator, degraded natural systems. And we can feel it wherever we go. Here in Belém, there have been lots of talks about what nature conservation means for the Amazon and for the rainforests. But as far as we're today in Ukraine's pavilion, surrounded by the showcasing of the conflict and its impact on the environment of Ukraine, this is one more evidence that restoring ecosystems is not only the environmental obligation, and that this is actually the strategy for peace, resilience, and national security. And today's panel brings together world-leading experts and practitioners working across different dimensions and intersections of climate, governance, post-conflict reconstruction. Together, we will explore how Ukraine and the wider world can rebuild stability by restoring land from the ground up. Welcome, everyone. And today we are very much privileged to be joined by Dr. Franциska Tannebberger, to whom I would pass the first introductory note, knowing that you have the time constraints today, who is representing Greifswald Mine Center and worked extensively on the topic of peatlands as defense mires and its ecological and security infrastructure as they are. And Franциska, your work has fundamentally shifted how we understand peatlands and how we are treating peatlands from carbon sinks to powerful nature-based infrastructure. And as far as we are very much privileged to have the wind blowing and adjusting the way how we are tolerating the current climate crisis in this room, could you please open our today discussion by explaining the concept of defense mires, how your working group has come up with this idea, and how rebutting can enhance ecological climate and even territorial security, the topic that is so hot and so important in Ukraine's context, but beyond. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Evgenia. I'm very glad to be here. As Greifswald Mire Center, together with many partners like FAO, UNDP, UNEP, Wetlands International, we are for many years already at climate conferences to bring up this topic of peatlands. And especially here in Brazil, it's very useful to do so because Brazil is the country, the tropical country with the largest peatland area. So we talk a lot about forests here, but also about peatlands. And later on today, we will have also an official side event about a peatland breakthrough, which is under the action agenda of COP30. I would like to share a few slides with you about the topic of peatlands, because many people, we know forest. You sit in front of a forest. Forests are always in our minds, which is very good. And I don't want to play forest against others, but we hardly look into the soil. And that's so important because soils are really important for our livelihoods. This is a typical peatland. It's actually one in eastern Poland. We can move on to the next slide, please. And this is where we actually find peatlands all over the world. This is the most updated map of peatlands worldwide. It was part of the Global Peatlands Assessment, which we published in 22 and launched in Sharm el-Sheikh at COP27. And it's a joint work with UN Environment and FAO. and produced in our center, in Greifswald-Meyer Center. You see we have lots of peatlands in the northern hemisphere. Of course, you think of Canada, of Scandinavia, of Siberia. We do have a belt of tropical peatlands, including Brazil, the DRC, Indonesia. And we have very little peatlands in the south, which is only because we have no land in the south. There is no land. Otherwise, we would have peatlands as well. Next slide, please. Now let's have a look at Europe. Europe contains 12 of the global peatland area. And this is the peatland map for Europe. It may look a bit empty for Ukraine, but that's more because of the projection as well. So there is quite a lot of it. And especially in the north of Ukraine, of course, the border region with Belarus, with Poland, the famous Pripyat marshes. And the slide, the pictures show you peatlands all over Europe, from north, where we have ones with permafrost features, really down to the south, to the Mediterranean region, where we have little on the map, but we have peatlands also because they are often on slopes. So it's very hard to depict something which is in a mountain on a slope on such a map. But you can see here, for example, this is from Spain. All these areas are covered with blanket box. So it's a lot of such ecosystems around. And this is just to give you an idea how they look like and how beautiful they are. Next slide, please. So the status of these soils that are so important as wetlands for us is very different. And if you look on the chart, in most continents, only part of it is drained in red and most of it is blue. So it is undrained, it's a wetland that can be used, for example, also for defense or for many other purposes that provides a lot of ecosystem services. In Europe, it's different. Around half of our peatlands are drained. So they are no longer a wetland. Do not recognize them. They are cropland. They are farmed made with different crops, or they are grassland, or they are settlements now. And if you look here at this chart, you see the different countries in Europe. I can say I'm from Germany. We are kind of world champion in peatland drainage, and this is something I'm not proud of, but this is our history. We drained 98% of our peatlands mainly for agriculture. And at that time, it was for the good of people. It was for societal benefits. But now we know better that these soils emit a lot of CO2 and that we better use them in a wet way. And then if you move up to Ukraine, it's around half of the peatland area in Ukraine that is drained. So it's also quite a substantial area. Next slide, please. So now this is the Global Peatland Hotspot Atlas that we published in 24. And it shows really what the hotspots are. And looking back again here at Europe, we have here the areas where we have cropland on peat soils. And you can imagine in a cropland, you plow the land, you bring a lot of oxygen into the soil, and this really then stimulates decomposition and CO2 emissions. On a total scale for Europe, these soils contribute 4% of the total greenhouse gas emissions. Other countries, in some countries, it's much more. So in Germany, it is 7%. Region where I live and where you live, it is 40% of all greenhouse gas emissions. I just continue. Okay. I think technicians are very brave here at COP30. They have to do the impossible. Yeah, and then again, if you look at our countries here, you see the peatland distribution again very nicely. You see, for example, also here very well how many peatlands there are along the Finnish Russian border, and this is something Finland is very much aware of. And this brings me now to this defense mire topic, that in Finland they are actively also guarding the peatlands along the border to keep them wet, similar in the Baltic countries. And you also see that there are really hotspots of cropland on peat soils also in Ukraine, northern Ukraine, and in Germany. Next slide, please. And this is something I also wanted to show what the big potential of it is. So first look at these circles for the EU. Only 3% of the agricultural land in Europe are peat soils, but 25% of the emissions from these soils, from the total greenhouse gas emissions, are from these soils. And in some other countries, it's much more unbalanced. So in the Baltic countries, or let's look at Germany, for example, here, it's 7% of our agricultural land and 37% of the total emissions from agriculture. So if by revetting, by making these lands wetlands again, you can achieve really a high climate benefit, and it is still possible to continue agriculture. I cannot present this in detail now, but just be assured that there are many people working on it because farmers need continued income. Next slide, please. Okay, and it is also an opportunity for defense. And I think you have seen many of such pictures here of tanks, Russian tanks in peatlands that cannot continue because of the very wet, the very moist soil. And this is actually data from Belarus, from an old textbook, where they measure the pressure in kilogram of per square centimeter, and also what kind of vehicles can pass on it. And in a drained peatland, a tank can very well pass, similar to a tractor, for example. And that's why these soils were drained, that big machines can drive there. And then in a very moist peat, which would be normal in a wetland, it's only people who can pass. So in any warfare that is really on the land, it really helps to have wetlands, because then you reduce the amount of possibilities for an enemy to pass. You really bring it down to a few narrow places, maybe, that you can better watch and guard. It does not help you against drones, but it's very clear that why maybe we need more hedgerows in the landscape and other things that our ecosystems can provide. But for anything on land, it is an important topic. Next slide, please. So earlier this year, we launched an information paper about this topic, and we combined it already with financing and with market development, because we need to think about finance all the time as well. It's good to have nice ideas, but if nobody can pay for it, it's a problem. And currently the EU is developing a carbon removal certification and carbon farming framework. And this is something probably also discussed over here at COP30 in some events. So by spending part of this money, and they have methodologies on peatlands, we are actively working with the Commission on it, we could also strategically invest in defense measures. So it is important to also see where these areas are located and that countries make use of it. So we could also then mobilize money from the private sector. And we also suggested that the EU could be an anchor buyer for part of the emission certificates generated for some period of time. And we do it together with a startup from for carbon markets, AEGO. Next slide. What we also realized that there was really a big of media interest in it. So it's just a few lines from Financial Times, Politico, other journals. So it is about how to keep Putin out of Europe, refill the swamp. That was one of the headlines. And for example, Poland's PT politics. So we see that we can bring this topic of soils, of wetland soils, into politics. There are many people working on it now in Poland, for example, and in the Baltic countries and in Ukraine. So we will also, we work now towards more events next year to bring together more people on this topic. And a last slide, please. So this is what a colleague developed. It's in German. I'm sorry, but it's tanks again, peatlands against tanks. I think it's very nice. This is about wet peatlands, and you see here again a map that shows wetlands in total. So it's the rivers, it's the peatlands. So our continent is really full of these ecosystems, and we should make better use of them also in when thinking about defense. Many thanks.
It's fascinating. Thank you so much, and applause from the audience. And as far as, like, we have the privilege of having 10 minutes of your time here with us, I would like to follow up with a question that would kind of later on sparkle the ongoing discussion, and eventually we have like the full panelist representative here, and maybe some of the questions will be coming up from the panelists themselves. But the question, when you are framing the nature-based solutions, and in this case as a defense, this case the peatlands as the defense one, do you think that this is the narrative that can help the policymakers prioritize the nature-based solution and to increase the possibility that the protection of peatlands or other territories that have specific ecosystem value would be prioritized and not say blinded? Because something which we have been witnessing recently, then when we're talking about defense, where we're talking about the increase of the military spending, it is the nature that always is somewhere behind, while it is the nature that is there for us to protect and to provide the future for whatever is happening, like amid the crises and ongoing challenges of war considerations?
Thank you very much for this question. I don't think that it is the topic or the framing that is now really making the biggest difference. But if we look at Europe, we have a European climate law, we have national climate laws, we have the nature restoration regulation now, so we anyway have to revert peatlands. A lot of people do not yet really think about, but if you look at the Paris Agreement, the net zero target for 2050, but then it means by 2050 all peatlands have to be wet. Otherwise, they would continue to emit. So there is no way out. But still, I think the working together now with military in this respect can catalyze more speed. And I think this is what we also need, because we are running out of time and we need to think about how to become faster. And we also see that for revetting a peatland, you have very exhausting permission procedures, usually in many countries, not for military activities. So military can also be an opportunity to speed up, to see how processes can go faster. And at the same time, it is very much about synergy. So I think we also must look and prioritize decisions that bring a lot of synergy between our climate, biodiversity objectives, our military defense objectives. And this is, I think, a good example for it.
Thank you very much, and thank you for approaching the topic of the military industry being on board, because I think this is something that has been in the domain of the discussions, whether UNFCCC is like enough and the framework is enough to tackle the emissions that are connected with the military industries overall, and you're bringing in the topic that having them on board and looking into the peatlands at this solution where we can have the military industries actually supporting our climate goals and our biodiversity goals as well. Thank you very much. Maybe there is a question from the panel itself, and then we would kick off.
One more, like maybe. So thank you so much for this amazing keynote. Write my PhD about peatlands as well, so it's amazing. I think perhaps have Meyer Center on board. And my legal research was kind of showing, as you might know as well, that the European Union is in favor of climate protection and climate targets especially. And I think the main hurdles lay on national legislation, that the water German one, but also our soil law is so outdated that we need to work on those instruments and like clear legal norms to privilege peatland revetting over drainage. And I think there could be a benefit about aligning those national-driven policy or defense strategies with our international and European targets, since climate is driven mostly from a European level and defense mostly from a national level. We have co-benefits on both levels, but addressing different level governance framework. So what do you think about that, that we have different angles, how we could approach peatland revetting?
I think it's very much needed, and I think it's a good proposal. It's not yet clear for me how to get there. I mean, what you described would be very nice, that there would be more alignment. But I think it's a very good suggestion. And actually, this session also made me thinking that it would be nice to exchange more with you as ECOM about this topic, and because we really want to work on it in the coming year as well. We have been also contacted by a lot of potential partners, but we have not yet a lot of legal capacity on board. So I think that would be a good opportunity for collaboration.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this information. I learned a lot. I mean, the topic of peatlands for me is totally new. So just a quick question, which probably you should spend like 2 more hours speaking of it, but just maybe briefly, how exactly do we vet it? How do we make sure that it's efficiently, whether it's through irrigation or some specific ways to irrigate, or what are the, I mean, how to get back to the peatland basically?
Thanks. It's a very good question, actually. And thank you for asking, because sometimes people do not dare to ask such a question. The key point is it's actually revetting is not an activity any longer. It is the stop of drainage, because drainage is the thing that changed the condition of a peatland entirely. Usually you dig ditches, so with big machinery, you have ditches then, and then the water drains into these ditches, and then either with pumps or with just by natural elevation differences, it flows then basically into the sea. So the water flows from our inlands much faster in the end to the Baltic Sea, to the Black Sea, whatever. And so you stop, it's a one in a time activity to stop drainage that costs you money, but then it is stopped, and then you have all the benefits again from the wetland. And so you do not need to invest more energy than in keeping it wet, because peatlands in our landscapes exactly develop where we have excess water. So it's depressions, so it's lower laying parts of the landscapes, it's along the rivers, it's along the coasts, and this is where we also have in future excess water. We do have climate change, of course, so we need to observe how our climate changes, but in most regions, or in many regions at least, it is not that the total amount of precipitation changes, but the distribution. We have longer dry periods in summer, so then you need to hold back the water in winter. But this is something we know a lot about it, and we can do. So there may be some parts of Europe, maybe also in southern Ukraine, but there you have little peatlands. So it's actually most in the north, and I think in the north it's very much only about stopping drainage, and then you get them wet again.
Thank you very much for your presence here, and being mindful of your time. We would let you go and join and spread the fantastic expertise which you have on peatlands, and we would definitely be working on further with Ukraine and beyond how to make this topic work. But yeah.
Yeah, maybe just before I hand over to you, I have to go to the East African Pavilion because we discussed peatlands there now as well. But I would like to come back. Maria already said that tomorrow there's an important event, and I hope to see many of you again tomorrow.
And one last thing, we prepared a discussion paper before this event altogether. Franziska, Yevgenia, I want to thank you so much for this collaboration, our first one together, and I would love to continue with ICAM and also if so to collect our German, Greifswald, and Berlin expertise. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And now we are moving to our panel discussion itself. It was incredibly interesting to hear this very, very like one piece of a puzzle when we're talking about the soil protection and soil security. And we are today privileged to be joined by Professor Michael Rodi, Professor Oleg Rupel, Marta Trofimova, and Theo Reinholz. Yes, which would be talking about other different puzzles covered under the broader topic of soil protection and soil security. And I would like to start with the question to Professor Oliver, who has an extensive expertise and very much connected to what Franziska just mentioned, running to the South African Pavilion, where she would be talking about peatlands itself, because Professor Rupel has worked across Africa a lot and the global south, and your research and your expertise and like your work with the government, like all across the countries, like uniting your European expertise as well, provides crucial insights on how environmental governments can support stability in volatile and conflict-affected settings. So the question for you is actually how your observation, what your takes on, and the lessons which we can take from the South Africa and beyond, especially in the context of the drought, soil degradation, land degradation, and institutional transformations, can help inform Ukraine's soil protection and integration into the broader climate security nexus.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Yevgenia. This is a wonderful discussion, and the question that you're asking me is a quite challenging one. I could now speak for 3 hours and without stopping, but I will try to make it short. I think it is important that we are addressing soil from a different dimension. We are addressing soil all of a sudden from a security dimension. Also in the international design of legal instruments, the security issue is coming to the fore, and I think that is very good, because soils as such have been largely neglected over the past years. We have worked on the atmosphere, we have worked on water. Obviously, we have the 3 Rio Conventions, but do they address the protection of soil? And the answer is they all do, but not sufficiently. And they are not orchestrated in a manner that they sufficiently correspond with each other. And that's why I think the securitization aspect of soil is an extremely important one. Why? Number one, it gives a wider attention to to the medium of soil. It gives an aspect of necessity of international cooperation into the discussion, and it calls for better regulatory environments. What does that mean at the international level? It depends. Maybe a better international agreement apart from the CBD, the UNFCCC, the UNCCD frameworks, or maybe to bundle these agreements and to provide them with the necessary teeth and powers to correspond with each other to better protect soil on the different continents. This, of course, calls for international cooperation efforts, and I'm not sure if the appetite is there. Coming to the African continent, because we just learned and was very interesting to hear about Ukraine. Yes, unfortunately, since the Russian aggression, Ukraine is subject to a lot of hardship. And I would also like to say there are, on top of that, about almost 100 international armed conflicts going on at the same time. Many of these conflicts are on the African continent. So the African continent is subject not only to conflict, but also in the context of being the driest continent, suffering from the impacts of climate change, suffering from high levels of poverty, and of course, other hardships. Now, where does the soil come in? Soil is something that also in Africa has largely been neglected. In many African countries, the domestic legislation on soil is outdated, stemming from the colonial days, not being enforced, not being monitored, not being sufficiently accredited, also with regards to the responsibilities of landowners. And therefore, I'm particularly happy to just return from Africa, where I have managed in cooperation with the FAO and UNEP and the African Ministers for Environment to come up with an African model law to protect soil. This is one of the first model laws of its nature on the African continent. It addresses the African Union as a union that of course, does not yet have the same legal capacity as the European Union, but with a long-term vision, the African Union now has a model law available that it can use to domesticate in 54 African countries soil protection up to a level that brings more attention to the subject matter. This will require enormous levels of financial support, development cooperation, international cooperation, regional cooperation, but coincidentally, in the European Union, there also is a high demand for developments in soil regulatory developments. And perhaps the African Union and the European Union, being close partnerships in the global south, in the global north, can maybe utilize the momentum in order to create synergies in the development of their regional and national soil legislations on the way further. And I think this will contribute to more security. This will contribute to better cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the comprehensive entry to discussion and tackling the points of law. And it's very interesting to hear the African context and the way how modeling the law can help transform the vision into the concrete steps that could be later on introduced into the actions on the ground. And as far as I can see, that we are very much privileged to be joined by our keynote kickoff speaker today that would give us a little bit of the national perspective of the status quo of the Ukrainian soil and protection. The Deputy Minister Pavel Kartashov, thank you very much for joining us now. I know that you have a pretty busy and challenging schedule these days. And Ukraine is building the reconstruction model when the soil health, sustainable land governance, and ecosystem restoration are not side issues, but pillars of the national resilience. So, dear Pavlo, we invite you now to share your opening continuing remarks now and the vision of the government of Ukraine for integrating soil protection and land restoration into Ukraine's recovery and its alignment with the EU climate environmental practices.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here today with you on this panel. It's a great honor for me to open this important discussion on security from the ground up. And this team reflects both Ukraine's experience and our shared global challenge. Obviously, today we face overlapping crisis of war, climate change, and environmental degradation. We are reminded that true security begins with nature itself. The stability of nations, resilience of communities, and prosperity of economies all depend on the health of our soils, water, and ecosystems. In Ukraine, the destruction and damage caused by Russia's full-scale invasion has affected. Sorry, I have some problems with headphones, so I'll try to. So the destruction caused by Russia's full-scale invasion has affected millions of hectares of farmlands, forests, and peatlands. Landmines, contamination, and disrupted war system pose serious risks to our environment and livelihoods. Yet, despite these challenges, Ukraine remains fully and firmly committed to a green, sustainable recovery, and we have already today a panel discussing how energy should be restored, but we obviously need to keep to green transition and to our green actually rebuilding and restoration. And this is something aligns with European Green Deal, EU Soil Monitoring Directive, and Paris Agreement. Also, through our ongoing reforms, we're building a governance framework that integrates soil protection, climate resilience, and sustainable land use into our national recovery strategy. Together with our partners, ICAM, IFZO, the Greifswald Maya Center, FAO, and many others, and obviously with the private sector, we're implementing projects that restore degraded soils and wetlands, showing how ecological restoration can also serve peace, stability. And also, healthy soils are not merely an agricultural asset. They are a strategic resource. They sustain food security, regulate water and energy systems, store carbon, and provide natural foundation for defense and resilience. As we rebuild Ukraine, we aim to translate these principles into practice through innovative financing, and especially under Article 6 cooperation, EU carbon removal certification framework, and partnerships that engage local communities, farmers, and veterans in land restoration. We are doing a pilot projects today within Article 6, and I believe we will have first result and first announced maybe early next month or maybe next year. We have some delays, but obviously this is something which will have a huge added value for the businesses, for Ukraine green transition, and for all societies. And last but not least, let me reaffirm about this conversation a simple but powerful truth. By restoring our soils, we restore our future. From the ground up, we can rebuild not only Ukraine's landscape, but also a more secure, resilient, and peaceful Europe. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. We really appreciate you finding the time to join us today. We know how busy you are, and we know that there is a lot more to do to implement the vision which you you highlighted into the real life, and we started talking about what could be the instruments, how to implement this vision. We worked a little bit through what laws mean, what kind of natural-based solutions like peatland can serve for the defense. And now in your speech, you mentioned that businesses would be benefiting as well within your broader work of the Article 6 leverage. Support the projects that would be aimed at recovery and reconstruction of Ukraine. And that is said, I would like to bring into the conversation Marta Trofimova, who is representing and like talking on the behalf of Kernel, one of the biggest largest agri-food companies in Ukraine. And I'm very much privileged to know Marta since COP28, where she was sharing the vision that she really wants businesses to take the vital part of what true recovery and reconstruction on the ground in Ukraine should be. And especially in the agricultural sector. And like 2 years after, we have like that your work, the fantastic work and dedication has been slowly but steadily having its results. So like seeds of resilience, we will be talking about that like tomorrow and later on in a couple of days here in Ukraine's pavilion. But the seeds that which you planted back then, like obviously are growing. So the question for you, as Kernel is one of the largest agri-food companies in Ukraine, and it's operating like with a fantastic courage and dedication of its workers under the most challenging conditions and in any agricultural sector in Ukraine, in like the modern history of Europe has ever witnessed. And you're working a lot with the farmers on the ground. So can you please reflect how companies like Kernel are integrating regenerative agriculture, and what are the biggest challenges, and what private sector like is bringing to sustainable land management and regenerative agriculture in its vision?
Thank you, Zhenya. Yeah, just to confirm what you said, sustainability and climate resilience takes time and patience. I think all of the colleagues from this area can agree on this. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this panel. Kernel is one of the largest grain producer and exporters in Ukraine, but I think what is also important is that we are the leading exporter of sunflower oil. So we have a lot of markets in the world relying on how we do business in Ukraine and how we produce in Ukraine, because and how do we ensure stability of the supply, which was especially visible in 2022. And now is a lot of efforts are focused on keeping that. So when it comes to sustainability, sustainable agriculture practices, also known practically as regen agriculture practices, that are mainly focused on maintaining the health of soil, the productivity of soil, the soil organic carbon, and all the other vital characteristics of soil in check. The first important thing to understand is that agriculture producers, especially large agriculture producers like Kernel, prioritize these metrics. For them, it's the core business asset that they have to work with, the soil productivity, opposed to some of the stereotypes that sometimes circulate. Something that I heard personally several times, that Ukrainian agriculture is very effective and very efficient, but not sustainable. And it's part of our work, including the participation in COP and supporting Ukraine's pavilion, is to address that stereotype by really communicating the real the practices that we're doing. Because what Kernel is doing, or what many other companies in Ukraine are doing, they and they're coming from the very business-oriented aspects. So the climate aspects is actually a second priority when it comes to reduced tillage, cover cropping, optimization of nitrogen fertilizers, optimization of application of nitrogen fertilizers, because it's all the idea of keeping the moisture in, really saving up on the resources, and making sure that you're efficiently using the resources of soil and other ecosystems provided without depleting them, because we are living in the long-term perspective. Like we're planning our crop seasons in 5 years ahead and beyond. So it's important to you're not interested in really depleting your main assets. So that is the main point that we are trying to communicate. And the question is, how do you scale it up? And this is when you need to have some incentives. And this is what the Pavlo and other colleagues have mentioned about the frameworks that have been developed right now, such as EU framework for carbon for carbon removals and Article 6, but also the voluntary carbon markets. It's something that gives a very important monetary incentive to companies to scale up these operations and make it in a very tailored and organized way. And this is specifically what Kernel has been working on since 1.5 years, and there's even more work to do. But we are developing the pilot carbon project in line with the voluntary carbon markets VERA. We're starting with a very small land. It's only 14,000 hectares. That's why it's a pilot, because we've been cautious about so many different uncertainties on the market. But the idea is that we want to test everything out in order to scale it up. And the scale up, we believe it will be ready to scale up in 1 year. The scale up will not only cover Kernel's land bank, which is 360,000 hectares, but the eligible land will be might be less. But it's also about involving other farmers. Especially one of the core social benefits and targets of this project is to provide the farmers and the agriculture producers who have undergone humanitarian demining or suffered a lot from war impacts and require some recovery. So they essentially require additional investments into the recovery to provide them with the additional monetary support to go through that. So this is I think I'm going to be probably touching upon a little bit of your next question, but this is essentially the prerogative of large companies such as ourselves to test things out on our own, to learn the lessons, and then extrapolate on the market and support others in this transition. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. I actually have many questions to follow up, but the one of the points which you approached, it's that all of these frameworks and all the work that you have been doing, they are kind of like foreseeing what transition should look like. And when we're talking about transition, we like in any areas and any spheres, these are the people who are standing behind that. And this is what is very widely discussed this COP, like the topic of just transition. And it would be interesting to get to know whether like the companies, like the businesses are foreseeing just transition in their like future planning, because we had like very interesting discussions across like energy sector actors. But maybe to approach the topic of the just transition, I would loop in Till, because we have been discussing a lot what just transition means, and marrying two passions of yours, and actually the passion for peatlands and the passion for justice, because like you are one of those like experts and personalities that do stand for people a lot, and transmitting, translating the people first principle in whatever you do, either it is work or research, and having this in mind. So what is this specific idea of the just transition if we are talking about the soil and the soil protection? And we do depend a lot on peatlands these days and surrounding lands for the livelihoods, whatever regions we're talking about. I know that you're more an expert in the German context, and you have been working a lot with Finnish context recently, but very much dedicated to Ukraine since our history from the last pavilion, last COP. So why just transition is so essential? And when we are designing and thinking about soil protection and the peatland protection and revetting measures, what Franциska has mentioned, how do we link it with law and regulations, and overall, what is just transition from your perspective?
Thank you so much. Now I'm a bit so yeah, that was so cute. But I think you totally framed it right, because just talking about law and not understanding what it means for the people on the ground, I think it's one of the worst mistakes you can make as a lawyer. And that's the reason when you need to go out to the people, talk to the people, because when you're in your ivory tower and you conduct your desk research, you don't know what's the matter on the ground. And I think soil is this kind of environmental media, which is crucial in that regard, because it's a thing that we are walking, and we are getting in contact every day. And also peatlands, because it's a most impactful type of soil that we have climate-wise. And this is so important to keep in mind. And legal frameworks are made for people in the end, isn't it? And creating a law which is not accepted by the people won't be accepted in the long term, is not sustainable, and doesn't serve intergenerational and intertemporal justice. And by that, this is also linked to the concept of social acceptance. And I frame the just transition topic as like a singular concept. It's influencing so many levels of law and governance. And I think one of the key questions is if it's framed like the European Union does it, we don't leave anyone behind, or if we accept that there are winners and losers. Because every transition creates different perspectives and different impacts on the people. And I think that's one of the questions that we need to ask ourselves first place. What do we want to reach? What is our aim, our targets? And just to highlight that with like the developments we talked about earlier inside the climate security nexus, also Franziska proposed to us. As far as I know, in Ukraine, there were many emergency laws after the full-scale invasion. And when it comes to peatlands or soil in general, there's like a law which is creating a 2-kilometer buffer where the government, like to the borders and to the front line, where the government can create any measures that are needed for defense. Talk about the climate dimension, we are, like, especially from the German and European perspective, we are now talking for decades. We know about environmental science. We know what would need to be done to like fulfill our sustainability and climate goals. But we are still talking about acceptance. On the other hand, on the defense nexus, we are just creating the laws. And I think that's one of the really interesting legal perspectives. How do we get people on board? Because we can't national level, just taking the land from the people and just saying there's going to be a peatland now, because as Franziska said, we need economic perspectives for the future as well. And as you highlighted before, carbon removal frameworks are essential, economic incentives as well, to give them a future, a perspective, and also communicating that, because law is just as good as a communication. And I think lawyers need to work on their communication because they love to talk about themselves, but not about what they're doing for the people. Thank you.
Very much, and I know that you have done a lot, the vast research on the acceptance, and you have been involved in the conversations, like what is the public acceptance of peatlands, and we would definitely love to follow up and to learn more about that. And as I have noted that there is kind of like this thread all across other conversations about law, and that's why I'm would like to bring the legal, one of the mountain of law, climate, and not only. Michael, because you have been working, and ICAM as an institute have been working for more than 10 years in the legal dimension and policy dimension. When we're talking about, and one more topic that emerged today, it's securitization, what Professor Oliver mentioned today. So what is your take on how the laws and governance are emerging in this soil topic, soil protection topic, worldwide, and what lessons can be taught to Ukraine, or maybe what lessons should have been avoided from the way how we are tailoring our frameworks? Because you have been working a lot on setting the tax reform in Vietnam, so definitely we're working in this in the challenging contexts, for sure, and with your expertise in the climate legal dimensions and governance. So what would be your take on that?
Yeah, thank you, Evgenia, and thank you for having me here. We were working on that, starting with the law and policy cooperation, and the result with cooperation of Oliver Ruppel for Africa and Martha Leutzinger for Brazil, we developed papers which we put online. You can find them on the ICAM website. And the clear result is that there is a huge contrast. On the one side, the importance of soils. Probably you discussed it before. I came a little late. Soil has so many functions, from nutrition to storing water, and now new functions come up. Especially climate, as soils are the most important terrestrial storage of CO2, and especially with the wetlands, you realized how this comes into the discussion. And now we have a sharp contrast to the legislation all over the world, I would say, because when I scale up from what we researched, the soil is either has no own legislation. It is, Oliver mentioned that it is touched by other areas of law, like agrarian law or water law. And now the task is to really bring the soil at the center of legislation, thinking legislation from the soil. And this deficit is now tackled in quite some areas. I was really surprised and astonished that Africa this time is a front runner in that. And I hope that the model law will be implemented in as many states in Africa as possible to set some minimum requirements. And the same is true for the European Union. Soil was not a topic there. Then recently, a soil strategy 2030 was implemented. And now we nearly finalized a real European soil law, which is not yet a full regulation of law, but a good starting point. With setting monitoring requirements, with defining what is healthy soil. And this is a starting point. And on the international level, I think Oliver is right. We have as well a very scattered framework. We have different conventions that touch the soil, but we have not a convention that bundles it, and it's probably unlikely that there will be an international convention on soils. So the question comes to UNFCCC, where it was also, we see a deficit up to now, to bring soil in the middle of the thinking. And this could happen in the ideal case with a protocol on soils, but here again, this is would be a very ambitious target. But still, at COP, there could be decisions that soil monitoring has to be integrated into the NDCs, and I'm hoping that this wave comes also to the COP, having first decisions, and from there potentially a consensual law could evolve slowly bottom up.
Thank you very much, and thank you for bringing one of the biggest topics that we are discussing at COP30 this year. It's NDCs, national determined contributions, that many countries have tried to already to have submitted, and Ukraine is one of those countries that submitted it last week. And I think the huge contest and the huge challenge would be later on how to work on creating the legal frameworks and policy frameworks that would enable the ambition that we are putting into our NDCs. And I know that we're all hot here, and it's truly truly quite of the challenge to have like the discussions, and like the huge kudos to every single panelist that is still like bringing so meaningful and like intensive expertise, like in the conditions when it's kind of like sometimes unbearable to think. So like maybe I would like wrap up with the final question to all of the panelists, and then like give the chance for the audience to ask any question if there is some, like online audience as well. If there is one tip of advice which you would like to share with Ukrainian policymakers and legislators, so some kind of the action that should be prioritized in the nearest term from the sphere you are currently working, either it is law, governance, academic perspective of the development, what would it be for Ukraine in order to ensure that green recovery and reconstruction, which Pavlo mentioned today, which is currently scheduled to be in the vision and mission and like legislative backup that Ukraine currently works on, how to make it enable if we're thinking about soil protection. So what would be the tip of advice for Ukraine to prioritize in the upcoming year to contribute to the development of the framework that would help meet both soil protection and Ukraine's green recovery endeavor?
Start on the left side. So thank you so much for this final question. And I think I would have two answers if it's possible. And the first one would be to, like even as law and policymakers, to include as much interdisciplinary expertise as possible to understand the challenge behind it. So when a lawyer needs to create a law, he needs more advice. He can't know everything. So we need to include other sciences as well, and also the local people, as I've said earlier today, to include the expertise. And the second thing would be to understand soil and peatlands, because it's my emotional topic. As a cross-cutting issue, that it's not just tackling soil law, not just tackling water law, it's tackling or addressing so many other issues. And I think this broad understanding is crucial. And then there would be like a legal follow-up question if you want to create like it's like an own peatland law, for instance, or if you want to implement it in all the other laws in a fragmented approach. I think there's like a detailed question for the lawmakers, but this will be my take on that. Thank you so much.
I would say that be in touch with private sector, communicate efficient communications with businesses to make sure that their on-the-ground experience is accounted for and that the policies will end up being evidence-based and therefore more efficient. Thank you.
A colleague of mine says soils are the melting pot of all ecological services. And I think he's right, because soils in the past used to be viewed from a very, very local perspective as the dirt on the ground in front of you. But soils are both local and global in nature. And I think it can come to the benefit of the Ukraine to build on the suffering the people have experienced, to rebuild their country, to rebuild their beautiful soils. I know Ukraine has the black soil, which is the most fertile soil in the world. With the support of international partners, with the support of the European Union that sees the Ukraine as an important incoming partner. I have to be careful what I say, I think, but the Ukraine has a huge potential in terms of its high agricultural capacity. I know that many countries in Africa have viewed critically to the Ukraine after the Russian aggression because they depend on grains from the Ukraine. They depend on the oil, the sunflower oil from Ukraine. It is crucial for their survival, and the Ukraine played a critical role in the past, and I think it should play a critical role again in the future. Also, with regards to the new experiences it had gained. Unfortunately, suffering can be a very hard experience, but one can grow bigger afterwards, and I think that has potential for the future.
Yeah, so we learned about the importance of soil, especially for Ukraine. And you will not be astonished that I will go for having a very good, strong, comprehensive soil law in Ukraine. And I think there's a good chance to leapfrog in this way, because the European Union law is only a very a very basic law regarding more technical things like monitoring and defining. And you could be a role model to develop a comprehensive law. And of course, I would integrate the points of Till Reinholz, that you also have to see the cross-cutting importance, go through all the laws, but design a law with defining healthy law and implement instruments. And for that, I think you need, of course, local experience and integrate not only interdisciplinary views, but the views from the people on the ground in the different areas of Ukraine.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions that would follow to sparkle that? Okay, I think that it would be definitely the questions like afterwards, and we keep on discussing, but as well implementing these discussions into the real actions and visions. I really hope. And thank you very much for bringing such a unique expertise from all of these sectors. And it was very interesting to observe how connecting all of the puzzles which we had, actually, businesses, just transition aspects, peatlands, kicking off the peatlands, having the governmental vision, having the experience of the African Union and governance. And that, thank you very much, Michael, for the reflection that Ukraine can be like the role model. And thank you for echoing this, because I think sometimes Ukrainians do talk about that a lot on the international forums, that Ukraine is becoming the role model or the case study. Sometimes it's hard to hear because the circumstances in which this vision is evolving, they're pretty challenging, and there's still people there on the front line. There are farmers that are growing the agricultural products amidst the ongoing destructions and bombing. And this is something that has been happening in Ukraine the previous week, the huge attack on the energy infrastructure again, and farmers are there farming while we are speaking. The bombs are falling, more destruction is coming, more challenges to tackle, but at the same time, so many important things are happening with the legislative processes, with the policies in place, with the dedication of businesses, with the dedication of the international partners, academics, and institutions that are sharing our green vision and supporting it and helping us to implement. And of course, the guidance of Ukraine becoming the part of the EU EU Union, as a full member of, it's something that is guiding us and helping us to keep on having this vision in place. So thank you very much, and we really appreciate. Yeah, we have the question. Fantastic. Thank
you so much. Sorry to interrupt you. Finishing up. I know that everyone is hot already. I can see the panelists here melting down. But yeah, I have the question. It's probably to Marta, but of course, all of other speakers, you're welcome to suggest your ideas. I know you are very passionate about the mining work, and it's one of the important tasks for Ukraine in order to restore our soil capacity. So what are the biggest enablers of this work at the national level and at the level of the business in order to achieve the goals of the restoring the potential of the soil and in order to properly prepare the grounds for the restoration?
Thank you for the question. I think using the opportunity, I will make the announcement about the tomorrow's side event, where we're going to be speaking together with Michael, Rorty, and Jenya tomorrow at 16:45 in side event room number 1 about the specific needs of agriculture in conflict-affected countries to deliver climate adaptation and mitigation, and where we're going to be specifically targeting the issue of humanitarian demining. So the main, I think I'm going to be very, it won't be a surprising answer when I say that the main enabler would be the finance. Estimations for Ukraine now, that is one of the most mined countries in the world, it's about billions of dollars. There needs to be a lot of time. It could be up to hundreds of years to fully demine it. And that's why all the different streams of finance will going to be important here. The innovative finance that's coming from more usual and, let's say, classical sources, specifically targeted for humanitarian demining, but also we want to explore the opportunities to bring the climate finance in here, because agriculture, and specifically soil health, they can deliver a lot of benefits and a lot of potential, but if it's mined and if it's suffering from the damages, it cannot do that without delivering a very primary topics, which means primary tasks, that is demining and the restoration of soil recovery, of soil productivity. So the link here is very simple, although sometimes maybe not obvious. The link between humanitarian demining and climate adaptation and mitigation, and that's one of the streams to be advocating for, the possibilities of climate finance to be applied here.
Yeah, of course, finances are crucial in this point, and when you have green climate finances, it's already in the scheme. That there should be sustainable mining, not repeating the mistakes we made in Europe and in other areas, to just leave the soil behind in a way. The tricky point is that overall we need trade treaties that strengthen the importance of healthy soils, of recovery. It's now, of course, difficult when a strong mining partner like the US come. Of course, they want to dictate the conditions and maximize profits. But this is especially a work for Ukraine and for the European Union as well, to go and push for trade treaties with sustainability clauses, at least to have a common framework which we, European Union and Ukraine, offer to the outside partners. But how strong this will be, this is an open question. But at least this is the only chance to try to have sustainability clauses in the treaty.
So my answer is not linked to the question directly, but I would just would like another thought about value, because finances and value are somehow linked, but value on a more abstract level, since we need to see soils as not renewable resource. And I think it's linked to the last question that you asked before. What would we recommend to policymakers? We talk about soils as it's endless or limitless, you know, and we are building, we are expanding, we are not stopping our land take, but financing and value, just to keep that in mind, it's not renewable from a human life cycle perspective. And just to give an example, peatlands are building up with 1 millimeter per year. So to build like a 10, 12 meter thick layer of peat takes 8,000, 9,000 years. And to mine this landscape takes like 1-2 days, you know, 10 centimeters per day. You can see how decades and millennia of climate history are disappearing. And then people are burning it for energy. And just to keep that timeline in mind, so that we have a feeling or an understanding of this temporal perspective, and we acknowledge the value of the soils beneath us.
Just one last sentence, because very importantly, Till just mentioned the value. I think we have ignored the fact that soils have no considered price tag, despite the fact that it is one of the most valuable assets that we have in the world. And this is a shortcoming. And I hope that the geopolitical shifts that we are currently experiencing in the world will not contribute to a deviation of climate finance that will fail to acknowledge the importance to put soil at the forefront of the climate negotiations of the future for the benefit of our food security and human survival.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the question and for the final remarks. We would have ongoing discussions about the climate finance in Ukraine's context in the pavilion, like in the upcoming week. So we're welcoming everybody to join and to check like the pavilion schedule and the agenda on the website, COP30 Ukraine. And thank you very much for, the current challenges that we are all experiencing here and in Ukraine and all over the world, that we keep on this going, talking and understanding like that it's only us, no matter from what area we're coming from, who can make this change, and using Ukraine as an example when we are building forward with a greener and more sustainable vision in mind. Thank you very much.